Welcome to the Module 12 podcast. In this module, we are going to be exploring the work of a group of artists known as the Post-Impressionists. Now, Post-Impressionist or Post-Impressionism is a term that has been created by art historians and applied simply to the group of artists who come after the Impressionists. It doesn't mean that the Post-Impressionists all have a similar style or were doing exactly the same thing. They certainly weren't. This is just a big collective umbrella term given to these artists to describe their place in art history. Now, even though their styles were different, these artists did have some ideas in common. First of all, they all sort of absorbed the lessons of Impressionism. Most of them went through some sort of Impressionist phase, and they liked a lot of the innovations of Impressionism. They loved, for example, the way the Impressionists liberated color and started doing new things with color, and they really liked that. So while they liked Impressionism, they felt that Impressionism hadn't gone far enough, that Impressionism wasn't quite the end of the road for what art could be. And the Post-Impressionists decided to go further with what the Impressionists started. They were dissatisfied with the way a lot of Impressionist paintings were simply capturing a transitory moment, just a brief passing moment in time. And they felt that a lot of Impressionist work lacked solidity. And you can kind of understand that if you look at, say, a painting by Monet, which is made of all these little tiny brushstrokes and it seems kind of fuzzy and vibrating, but none of the objects in a Monet painting necessarily seem really, really solid. And the post-impressionists said, we want our art to be kind of more solid than what the impressionists were doing. And we also want it to be a little more kind of timeless and important. We don't want to capture simply just a passing moment. So the post-impressionists set about, through their various styles, to kind of improve on what they saw were Impressionism's deficiencies. But keep in mind, they did appreciate Impressionism and thought it represented an important break from the art of the past. They are just going beyond and doing a little more. So let's look at some of these artists called post-impressionists. By the way, they probably would not have called themselves post-impressionists. Again, this is a term that has been given to them retroactively. Our first post-impressionist is a guy named Georges Seurat, and a lot of these artists, by the way, are going to continue being French. France, Paris in particular, is the capital of the art world at this time. Georges Seurat is a painter who has a very scientific mind. He treats color in a very calculated, uh, sort of analytical way. And so he's thinking about, in sort of a formulaic manner, how color shapes emotions. So yellow is going to make you feel this way, and purple is going to make you feel this way. He's almost sort of like an emotional puppet master in the way he uses color. He's my vote personally for the most anal artist who has ever lived, because his paintings are composed of thousands upon thousands of little tiny dots of color. He would take a very small brush and he would dip it in paint and put dot after dot on sometimes massive canvases. This is a great example, Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jatte. And this is a really big, big painting. And the image is completely composed of these tiny colored dots. This is a technique that came to be known as pointillism. And there's more to the idea of pointillism than just simply putting dots on a canvas. Pointillism is based on the idea that in order to get a green in a painting, for example, you can do one of two things. You can take yellow and blue and you can mix them on your palette to make green and then put that green on the canvas. Or, and this is what Seurat did, you can take a yellow dot and a blue dot and place them side by side on a canvas and then back away far enough from the picture and your eye will blend those two colors together to make green, a phenomenon known as optical mixing. So pointillism is going to be all about this optical mixing. And the theory is that the yellow dot next to the blue dot technique makes a more vibrant, intense, exciting green than if you simply mixed it on your palette and placed it on the canvas. So let's look at this painting. This shows a lot of Parisians who are basically out on a Sunday walk. There is an island, and you can see there's a kind of sunlight cutting through the trees, and they're out having a great time. Again, we see the everyday subject matter that started with the realists and carried through with the Impressionists. Seurat is continuing that. That's something he appreciates about the Impressionists. But look at all the areas of this painting. Every single area is composed of hundreds of tiny dots. And Seurat is going to take years sometimes to make these paintings. This one took about 2 years, and he did countless studies before actually executing the final painting on this. There's some really interesting little details. My favorite of which is there's a monkey on a leash. Check it out. It's in the lower right foreground, and this woman with this kind of crazy dress. Not crazy for the time, but we'd be amused by it if we saw a dress like this on the street. She has a monkey on a leash. Pretty awesome. Paris in the 1880s must have been pretty cool if you could walk your monkey in the park. We have other figures lounging around. We have a guy smoking a pipe. We have women sitting with parasols over their heads. So a pretty nice, lighthearted scene. Look at that tree in the upper left. Look at kind of the way it almost is fuzzy looking. It almost looks like a cloud of bees. There's a place where you can see the little dots sort of exert their influence. Here's a close-up of this painting so you can see more clearly the technique. Notice all these colored dots that are sitting beside each other. Here's another close-up just so you can really get a feel of what Seurat is doing here. By the way, this painting was the inspiration for a musical called Sunday in the Park with George by Stephen Sondheim. In my opinion, kind of a boring musical. But the production I saw, they had a massive canvas suspended on stage, and there were actors who had actually come out dressed as the people in the painting and take the same positions that the figures in the painting take. So, kind of an interesting concept. Here's another Seurat work. By the way, Seurat didn't turn out too many paintings during his life. For one thing, they took so long to make, and also he died kind of young. So here's another one of his kind of major paintings. It's called La Parade des Cirques, and it shows some performers. You can see in the middle there's a dude playing a trombone, and there's some backup players in the background, and we have the heads of an audience in the foreground, and then a man with a cane tucked under his arm who is coming in from the side over on the right hand part of the picture. And here's a close-up of that man, again illustrating this pointillist technique that Seurat was all about. And look at all the colors. Look at the blues in the jawline of the man, kind of uh, showing the shadow of the angle of the jaw. Uh, Seurat is not going to use a whole lot of like brown and gray. He is much more interested in this optical mixing phenomenon. So if you want, say, a brown or gray kind of color, you can make that by mixing two complementary colors such as orange and blue, or not even mixing them, placing dots of them side by side, and then backing away and letting that orange and blue kind of fuse together into some sort of neutral looking color. One more Seurat landscape. This is possibly a study for Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Chat, because it certainly depicts the island of Le Grand Chat, and we see uh, some boats out here in the river. We have a figure, a single figure in a boat. And we have a sailboat in the distance. Again, look at the way the tree is handled. Look at all the little dots and look at the shadows that are on the tree trunk underneath the foliage. They're all kind of blue and purple. So this is something that Seurat is going to pick up from the Impressionists as well. This idea that black doesn't exist in nature, that you should make your shadows out of blues and blue-greens and violets and that sort of thing. Now, there are all sorts of things that Seurat has borrowed from Impressionism, but let's think about how he's going further. He is not simply recording the impressions of light hitting his eyes. Instead, he's being very scientific and analytical in how he's using his color. He's structuring these pictures very carefully. He's putting a lot more time into his works than probably an impressionist would. An impressionist is almost like someone who's going out and sketching. Seurat is going to think these compositions through, very intentional about the colors he's using and how they're going to emotionally influence people. And that's going to be one of the common threads we see in post-impressionism is doing new and different things with color, even beyond what the Impressionists did. Let's look at another post-impressionist artist who had kind of an analytical, scientific mind. This is Paul Cézanne. Cezanne is an artist who is really going to try to improve upon Impressionism by making it more solid. He felt that Impressionism is just kind of fuzzy and not very permanent looking. And if you look at this painting of Cezanne's, The Valley of the Ark, you can get a sense of that. His mountain seems a lot more monumental and strong and solid than perhaps an impressionist would paint it. One of the things that Cezanne is all about in his quest for making impressionism more solid is looking at nature and reducing it to simple geometric shapes. So, for example, he might take a tree and instead of having all these individual leaves on it, he might make it look more like a solid wad of cotton candy. Looking at a mountain, he might reduce and simplify that mountain to some triangular or squarish shapes. He might look at a house, and instead of painting the light flickering off the house, he will make the house seem like a little building block of some sort. So that's one of the things he wants to do. He wants to look at nature around him and simplify it and reduce it to its most basic geometric shapes. In fact, Cezanne wrote to a friend of his who was a painter, and he said this: treat nature by the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. So everything is getting reduced and simplified in his quest to make something really solid. That's one of the things that Cezanne is all about. A couple of more examples. And also, it's the same subject matter. This next painting, Mont Saint Victoire, seen from the Bibémus Quarry. This is a mountain that, and we saw it in the last painting too, the Valley of the Ark. This is a mountain that Cezanne returns to again and again. He paints it over and over and over, never growing tired of it, apparently. Look at this painting. It is made almost of little kind of blocks or bricks of color. The way he's laid in the color is almost like a bricklayer might build a wall. Cezanne is someone who's going to be very influential on Cubist artists later because someone once remarks about his painting, it looks like it's made out of little cubes. Again, his quest for solidity manifests itself in simplifying objects to basic geometric shapes. All right, this next painting, Still Life with a Plate of Cherries, illustrates the other thing that Cezanne is all about, something called binocular vision. Now, binocular vision is basically the principle that each of our eyes sees a slightly different perspective. You can test this by taking your finger and putting it in front of your face, and then closing first your left eye and then your right eye, one after the other. And look at how the finger appears to kind of jump from side to side, to move slightly. That's because each of our eyes is looking at that finger from a slightly different angle. And in our normal vision, our brain is combining those two perspectives into one single composite image. Cezanne is very interested in optical phenomena. He's interested in how our eyes work. And for him, capturing this concept of binocular vision is a way he can be really truthful in his artwork. By incorporating binocular vision into his paintings, he can express kind of how the eyes actually function. This still life is a great example of that. We have a plate of cherries, and we have a plate of what appears to be peaches. And I want you to look at the dishes that those two things are on And notice that the plate of cherries seems to be at kind of a different angle than the plate of peaches. The cherry plate seems to be sort of tilted towards us, and the peach plate seems to be falling back. Here we have two different angles or perspectives combined into one scene. And Cezanne believes that even though, yes, this is kind of awkward, there's still a certain truth to it. He's getting at the idea of how our eyes actually work and trying to encapsulate that in a single image. And sometimes Cezanne's paintings, especially his still lifes, have this sort of perspective awkwardness to them. I mean, look at this next one, still life with a basket of apples. Look at the back edge of the table, kind of what might be a sort of horizon line in this picture. And notice that the back edge of the table on the right-hand side of the picture, kind of near the bread and the wine bottle, doesn't line up with the edge of the table on the left side of the picture, near the basket of apples. It's like he's not even trying to get correct perspective. Instead, he's trying to suggest multiple angles all in one picture. This is also going to be very influential on the Cubists, as we'll see in a later module, who are trying to capture multiple perspectives in one image. And here's a last example in case you needed another example. Still life with ginger jar and eggplants. And notice the opening of that green jar, the mouth of that green jar towards the top of the picture. Notice the type of oval that it's making. It seems a little too open for its perspective, especially if you compare it to the more purplish jar, the opening in the more purplish jar just below it. The plate of pears or peaches, I think it's pears, is leaning at kind of a crazy angle. Again, the perspective on a lot of Cezanne's work is just kind of crazy, and that's because he's interested in capturing multiple perspectives all at once. All right. If Cezanne and Seurat are kind of analytical and scientific in the way that they're approaching painting, this next painter and the other two who follow him are going to be a little more intuitive and emotional in the way they approach painting. They are going to be very interested in liberating color and doing new, crazy things with color that have never been done before. So let's look at them. Our first artist in kind of this emotional vein of post-impressionism is Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. And here is a picture of the artist, and you might notice that he's pretty short. This is going to be important in sort of shaping his art in an interesting way. Toulouse-Lautrec is born into a rich aristocratic French family. They have counts and countesses in their lineage. In fact, that's where the name Toulouse-Lautrec comes from. Those are actually places, locations. And so he is born into this bourgeois family, and unfortunately, his parents are first cousins, and there's some inbreeding that's been going on in his family for generations, and this results in a genetic defect in Toulouse-Lautrec. When he's young, he's in an accident and breaks both of his legs. And unfortunately, because of this genetic disorder, his legs don't heal correctly. They don't mend. In fact, they stop growing. And so he continues to grow, and he basically lives the rest of his life with the legs of a child or a boy and the upper body of a grown man. So he's it's kind of strange, uh, has kind of a strange appearance. And in many ways, he becomes an outcast in aristocratic circles because of how he looks. He's just not the sort of person people enjoy looking at a dinner party. So he kind of retreats into himself and decides to become an artist. He goes to Paris and he hangs out in some kind of sketchy locations, nightclubs and bars and dance halls, and he feels more accepted here. He feels like he can kind of blend in with some of the misfits of society and some of the more lowly people of the nightlife. So he's kind of a fallen aristocrat, and that adds to some of the interest, I think, in his biography. But because he is hanging out in these places where he feels accepted, this is where he draws the subject matter for his artwork. And Toulouse-Lautrec is all about sort of documenting the nightlife of Paris in the late 1800s. And during this time in Paris, one of the most famous and kind of scandalous places to hang out is a club called the Moulin Rouge. The Moulin Rouge, the name means red mill, is actually a nightclub that has an actual windmill on top of it that's spinning. And here there are all sorts of performers, mostly dancers, these women who have these big dresses that they're flapping around. So this is one of the places Toulouse-Lautrec hangs out, and most people know about it because of that movie with Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor, which I've never seen. But before that movie was this Paris nightclub that was around in the 19th century, and Toulouse-Lautrec hangs out there. Here is one of his paintings called At the Moulin Rouge. And we see an influence of Degas here. Toulouse-Lautrec was a fan of Degas, and he borrowed some of Degas' strategies, in this case, cropping. We are standing kind of on one side of a rail. That's the diagonal brown thing in sort of the left corner. And we are looking over the rail onto the floor of this nightclub, and we see people sitting at a table enjoying some drinks. A woman in a black dress with a high collar is walking by us on the right, and she's kind of glancing at us as she walks by. Notice how she is cropped, though. Just half her face is chopped off. In a similar way, the railing that we're looking over, the thing at a diagonal angle, is cropped off at the bottom. So this is totally influenced by both photography and Degas. Toulouse-Lautrec has actually included himself in this painting. There's a little self-portrait. He is the short man. We just see his face in a side view of his face and sort of his upper body. In the middle distance, you can see in the middle top of the picture, there's a man wearing a top hat. Well, the little guy just below him is Toulouse-Lautrec. Now, I want you to look at the way color is used in this painting. Look at that cropped woman's face, for example, the one I mentioned earlier. Look at how there's light shining from below and illuminating the bottom of her face. And the artist here is making the shadows in her forehead this kind of garish green, uh, a green that's repeated a little bit in the distant background. Look at the woman sitting at the table whose back is to us, and look at the bright orange of her hair. Toulouse-Lautrec is going to start doing new, crazy things with color. Up to this point in art, color has typically been consigned to a descriptive role. In other words, if you're painting an apple, you paint the apple red. It's what we call local color. And when the post-impressionists come along, they say, "Dadgummit, what if I want to make my apple blue? Just because I like the way it makes me feel. I'm going to do that." And so that's what Toulouse-Lautrec and other post-impressionists will do. They're going to start finding non-descriptive ways to use color, more arbitrary ways. And they're going to use color as an emotional device to simply express feeling. Here is another work of Toulouse-Lautrec's, also taking place at the Moulin Rouge. Notice the bright colors in this. We have a woman dancing in the foreground, and we have another man who has this crazy chin and nose, and you can see he's dancing with her. There is a 1950s movie called Moulin Rouge. It's the original Moulin Rouge movie, and you should rent it and check it out because they reproduce some of the characters from these Toulouse-Lautrec paintings, and the guy with the chin is played by this actor who has this big prosthetic chin on, so it's kind of funny. But again, notice the cropping. In fact, there is a man on the left-hand side of the picture who's walking totally out of the scene, and his face is cropped off. Notice also the bright colors, and notice kind of the sketchy way that Toulouse-Lautrec is making this painting. It almost looks like a drawing. A lot of his work seems kind of drawing-based. But this is Parisian nightlife as we approach the end of the 19th century, and there is no better witness to it than Toulouse-Lautrec. By the way, Toulouse-Lautrec participated in all of the seedier aspects of Parisian nightlife. He visited prostitutes. He drank a lot. In fact, he was a notorious alcoholic. They say that after there was some intervention on the part of some of his friends and people stopped serving him drinks, that he had a cane that he walked around with. And he had this cane hollowed out, and then he filled it with alcohol so he could drink alcohol from his actual cane when no one was looking. As you might guess, all of these activities did not have a very positive effect on his life, and he died at a pretty young age. Here's something else Toulouse-Lautrec was known for is posters. He is considered one of the fathers of contemporary poster design. He was an artist who realized that in order for a poster to be really effective, it needs to be simple and easily digested if you're walking by it quickly. So Toulouse-Lautrec is going to reduce his designs for posters to some very simple shapes because people don't have time to stop in front of a poster and look at it as if it were a painting and decipher all of its details. So here are a couple of his posters advertising uh, some of the performers in these dance halls. There's one for the Moulin Rouge on the left, and notice again we have that dude who must have been a really famous dancer with the big chin and the crazy nose. He's in the foreground, and we have a can-can dancer in the background. On the right-hand side, we have a poster for a famous performer named Jeanne Avril, and she is dancing with one of those big fluffy dresses. And this is the kind of dance where they're uh, kind of kicking their heels up really high and flipping their dresses over their heads, and the music is usually like dun 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 dun, dun that sort of thing. So very raucous and very exciting. A couple of more Lautrec posters, and really highlighting the flat shapes and bright colors that he chooses to use. These are also hand lettered. That's, I think, some of the appeal of them. The lettering feels like it's drawn by the same hand that made the picture, and I think that's a really marvelous thing. And one last Lautrec poster showing some can-can dancers. Notice again the flat shapes, the bright colors, the combination of solid flat area and line work. Just very rhythmic. It really seems like this was spontaneously drawn and it captures the spirit and energy of this type of dancing. So Lautrec is doing some really kind of fun, exciting things with bright color. Another post-impressionist artist who is using bright color is Paul Gauguin, another Frenchman, as a lot of these artists are. Check out this picture. This is called Vision After the Sermon. And in the foreground, we have all these women who look like nuns, kind of. They're wearing these dark dresses, and then they have these white hats. They're actually not nuns. I'll talk about that in a second, and they are looking out across a field that is like bright red. And in this field, we see an angel wearing a bright blue robe with these brilliant yellow wings, and he's wrestling a man. Uh, Look at the color in this. It's what we call non-local color. Grass isn't actually red. It's typically green, or if you are in Abilene, Texas, often kind of brown and crusty and dry and yellow. But very rarely do we see red grass. Here is Gauguin taking liberties with color. He is making up the color, basically. He's doing what he wants because he likes the way that it feels. He likes the vibe it has. And this is what a lot of the post-impressionists are going to do, and Paul Gauguin is foremost among them. Let's talk a little bit about what in the world is going on in this painting. Paul Gauguin is someone who comes to art a little bit late in life. It's his second career. His first career is a stockbroker, and he is a successful stockbroker. He makes some decent money. He has a family, wife, and kids. And then he sees some impressionist artwork and kind of falls in love with it and says, I think I'm going to become a painter. And that's what he does. He stops being a businessman, and he actually abandons his family, which means he's personally kind of a total jerk and a lousy family man. And he dumps them to become an artist. And he quickly kind of jumps on the bandwagon with a lot of the innovations of Impressionism and starts going beyond them. And he's really drawn to bright colors. And something about his philosophy, he wants to capture a sort of spiritual vision in his paintings, a sort of spiritual quality. And he believes that the best way to do that is by traveling to places that are primitive and non-industrialized. So he's drawn to, in this case, rural areas, places far away from the city. Here he feels that the people are more pure, that they have not been corrupted by the influences of technology and fast living in the big city. And they are more likely to have spiritual insights and see visions and that sort of thing. So, this painting, Vision After the Sermon, actually depicts not nuns, but peasant women in a region of northern France called Brittany. These are Breton or Bretonese women. And these things that look like nuns' habits are actually their characteristic dress. This is how they dress every day. And it's how they have dressed for hundreds of years. So Gauguin travels up to these tiny villages in northern France, these places that are far away from the big city, and he draws and paints women like these peasants, again, because he believes that the life they live is more pure and they are more likely to kind of have spiritual insights. So, in this rather strange painting, these people have apparently just come out of church and have walked out into a field and they see a vision of Jacob wrestling an angel, which is a story from the Bible, from the Old Testament. And perhaps the field is read to emphasize that this is a vision, it's not reality, or perhaps it's read just because Gauguin thinks that's cool. But at any rate, the overwhelming idea here is that these people are pure and simple and in many ways superior to folks who live in the city. They're more likely to see visions like this. Another painting from Brittany, Breton girls dancing, again emphasizing the pure, simple, good life of these people who are away from corrupting urban influences. Three girls in those characteristic headdresses, wearing little aprons and red corsages, dance in a bright yellow field, and they hold hands. And there's something wonderfully sweet and pure and innocent about this picture, which is actually in contrast to Gauguin's personal life, which I don't respect at all, just kind of a jerk, not a very good family man, but a great painter. Now, Gauguin's quest for the pure life took him to far-flung places. He painted quite a bit in these rural villages in France, but he also traveled to the South Pacific, to places like Tahiti, because he felt that he could find little pockets of civilization that were still primitive and untouched by Western influences. In a real sense, he was trying to rediscover the Garden of Eden. And so here's one of his paintings, Spirit of the Dead Watching, that was created during his sojourn in the South Pacific in Tahiti. And in this painting, he is after some similar concerns as what he was doing in France. It is a very spiritual painting, although in this case, a pagan spirituality. And it is dealing with primitive people, in this case, a native girl. This girl lounges on a bed or a mattress, and in the background and to the left, we have this mysterious figure in profile. Presumably, that is the spirit of the dead. Perhaps it is the ghost of one of her ancestors watching over her. We're not really sure. It's mysterious. It's visionary, much like the Vision After the Sermon painting. Notice there's some writing uh, in the upper left. That is the title of the painting. He would actually write these titles out in Tahitian on a lot of his works. Look at the colors. This is something Gauguin is known for. A lot of the women he paints in Tahiti have this warm, sort of golden skin, and he will contrast that with cooler blues and violets. Look at the bright yellow pattern that is on the bed sheet itself. So again, Gauguin is exploring color in a very arbitrary, non-descriptive way. He's trying to create a mood with color in this painting, a mood of intrigue and mystery. Another mysterious, spiritual, brightly colored painting from his days in the South Pacific. This is called Day of the God. And in the upper middle of this picture, we have what could be an idol or a person dressed in some sort of costume who seems to preside over this very strange scene. Below him is a woman with her feet in the water of a lagoon, and on either side of her are two figures sleeping. Uh, and to the left, some women bring something on their heads. Perhaps this is bread, perhaps this is food, an offering for the god. In the distance, we see sort of the earthly paradise of a South Pacific island. We see high cliffs, we see waves, and we see a beach. Notice in the foreground the color that is used in the water. We have all sorts of bright colors, bright reds and oranges and blues and greens, just crazy colors. This is one of post-impressionism's big contributions to art, and this is why this module is called a symphony of color. Its color is being used in new, exciting ways, and Gauguin is trying to give you a sense of otherworldliness and also of, I think, kind of paradise in this picture. All the colors of the rainbow seem to be in this painting. And a last Gauguin work, a little curious because here he is mixing some of that Christian spirituality that we saw expressed in his French paintings with some iconography of the South Pacific. This is called Ia Orana Maria, or We Greet Thee Mary, or Hail Mary. And in this painting, he reimagines the nativity story in Tahiti, the story of the wise men coming to visit Mary and Jesus. This Mary is a South Pacific Mary. You can see her standing in the red dress on the right, and the baby Jesus is sitting on her shoulder. They're identified by halos. In the foreground are all sorts of tropical fruits, maybe some bananas, and then in kind of the middle part of the painting, we have instead of wise men, we have a couple of natives coming to pay homage to Jesus. And there's actually an angel on the left hand side. We can kind of see this angel through the branches of that bush. So look at the bright colors. Again, look at the way that Gauguin is mixing spirituality and mysticism with a primitive culture. That's something he's very interested in. Gauguin, by the way, uh, kind of goes native when he goes to the South Pacific. He lives in a hut, and he also goes creepy native because he has like underage mistresses and lives kind of a dissolute life, and he actually dies there in the South Pacific. Our next artist is one you have probably heard of. His name is Vincent van Gogh. The correct way to actually say his name is Vincent van Gogh, but if you say that, people might not know. You can say that around artists, they'll know who you're talking about, but a lot of people don't know that. So I'm just going to say Vincent van Gogh so you know who I'm referring to. Vincent van Gogh is actually a Dutch painter, unlike most of the other folks we've been looking at. But he ends up in France and running in French circles. So a lot of his work is associated with French artists. Van Gogh is a really interesting guy, and he's really popular. A lot of people know some of the tragic details of his life, like he only sells like one painting in his life. He's not commercially successful as an artist, and he struggles with a lot of emotional and psychological problems. And he wrote a lot of letters. And a lot of people, one of the reasons perhaps he's really enduring and popular is because people feel like they know him through his letters. And he represents kind of the stereotypical troubled artist who is pursuing his own vision and making his own way and becomes famous only after he dies. So let's talk a little bit about his life because his biography is really intertwined with his artwork. Look at this first painting. It's called The Potato Eaters. And notice all of the kind of drab colors. This is a poor family sitting down for a meal, and it's all kind of like greens and blacks and browns. This is not where Van Gogh is going to end up in his color palette, but it sets the stage for the first part of his life. He doesn't want to be an artist his entire life. In fact, he starts off wanting to be a minister, wants to be a preacher. He comes from a long line of Protestant preachers. And he has a real heart for people. He loves humanity and he loves God also. And so he decides the best thing for him to do is become a minister. So he enters seminary or Bible university, and he just doesn't have the grades. He's not a very good academic, so he has to drop out of seminary. And he's like, oh man, well, what else can I do? So he applies to become a missionary. And apparently, it was with an organization that did not require a degree from the seminary. And this missionary society decides, well, we'll support you on a trial basis for a few months and see how you do. And so Van Gogh is pumped about this. He gets assigned to a region of Belgium called the Borinage. It is a coal mining region. And so he goes to this very impoverished area and he works as a minister among these poor coal miners. And Van Gogh has such a deep empathy with the people that surround him that he begins to live like them. Even though he's getting money from this missionary society, he gives a lot of that money away. He gives his own clothes to these poor people. He lives in kind of a little shack like they do, and he sleeps on the floor. And he is someone who completely identifies with the people who are under his care. And he is not a very good preacher. His sermons don't really connect with the people, but the people know that he really loves them. And in fact, he becomes such good friends with these coal miners that when the coal miners go on strike, the owners of the coal mining company talk to Vincent van Gogh and have him act as mediator between them and the coal miners. So he is a lousy preacher, but actually a pretty good minister. All is well and good until this missionary society that hired Van Gogh decide to check up on him. So they go to the Borinage looking for him and they can't find him. All they see is people whose faces are black with coal, who are dressed in rags, and they can't find their preacher who should stand out. He should be well dressed and that sort of thing. And it turns out that Vincent van Gogh is one of the coal covered, shabby looking folks. And the missionary society decides, well, this is not very fitting for a minister of God's word. This is inappropriate. He shouldn't look poor like the people. He needs to be dressed nice. And they decide he is not fit to be a missionary worthy of their support. So they yank his funds and he ceases to be able to support himself as a missionary. So uh, the world at this point loses a minister and gains an artist. Vincent van Gogh goes to Paris where he has a brother named Theo who is an art dealer. And Van Gogh gets interested in painting. And his early scenes, all is to say, to bring it back around to the potato eaters, his early scenes seem to be influenced by his time with these poor families in Belgium and he seems to be very concerned with the plight of the poor. And again, look at the colors, they're very drab. However, Van Gogh in Paris, under the guidance of his brother Theo, discovers Impressionism. And like other post Impressionists, is inspired by the way the Impressionists have liberated color. So Van Gogh's color palette totally changes and it becomes brilliant and bright like some of the other artists we've looked at like Gauguin and Toulouse-Lautrec. Here's one of his most famous paintings. It's called The Starry Night. There's actually a song written by Don McLean, the writer of the song American Pie, called Vincent, and it has the words in it, Starry, Starry Night. And so I always think of that song when I look at this painting. This is classic Vincent van Gogh. Bright colors, but also look at how he has applied the paint. He lays down the paint in little ribbons or strips that give the entire canvas a sense of energy and movement. Here the scene is a sleepy little village nestled in some hills. We have a cypress tree that's growing in the foreground, and then our eyes gaze up at the sky, and there are these stars that are not just little white dots of light, but they are swirling, sort of glowing, exploding celestial bodies. I mean, it seems like in this picture, the night sky is absolutely alive with energy. And here, Van Gogh is not copying reality as he sees it, he is interpreting reality. He is painting his feelings about the night sky. And that is a very important thing because increasingly, especially as we go into the 20th century, that's what artists are going to do more and more. They're not going to simply copy the outside world, they're going to interpret it and they're going to paint their feelings about the world around them. And that's what Van Gogh is doing, both through his colors and through his brushstrokes. There's a unity to this picture. Everything in it feels like it has energy and is growing. The cypress tree, because of the way the paint strokes sort of curve, actually seems like it's growing before our eyes. Let's look at some more works by Van Gogh. This is called the Night Cafe, and it is sort of a pool hall. You can see a pool table or billiards table more accurately there in the middle of the room. And in this painting, Van Gogh is again interpreting, he's distorting perspective, for example, he's ramping up the colors, and he's intentionally trying to use color to create an emotion. Here is an excerpt from one of his letters where he's writing about the Night Cafe. He says this: I have tried to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. The room is blood red and dark yellow with a brilliant billiard table in the middle. There are four citron yellow lamps with a glow of orange and green. Everywhere there is a clash and contrast of the most disparate reds and greens. In the figures of the sleeping little hooligans, in the dreary, empty room, in violet and blue. So he goes on to say that he's trying to use these colors in a sinister way to try to express how you could ruin yourself in one of these seedy places at night. So he's not just copying the colors that he sees, he's putting in colors that sort of interpret his feelings about this place. Here is another urban scene at night, but one to me that has a different feel from the night cafe. This is called Cafe Terrace at night. And to me, it seems calmer. It seems more peaceful. Look at this wonderful contrast between the warm, glowing yellows that are in the area of the tables and the wall and canopy of this outside cafe. And then the cool, calm blues and violets in both the sky and the buildings in the distance. To me, this is a very pleasant painting. One of the things that Van Gogh does, and this is something he has in common with his fellow countryman, Rembrandt, is paint his own portrait. He does a lot of self-portraits, in part because he's doesn't have a lot of money and needs models. And he documents himself, again, like Rembrandt, his entire life, and he's pretty unflinching. He paints himself warts and all. And his paintings really seem to express his psychological state at any given time. And again, look at these series of self-portraits. Look at the one on the left, for example. Notice those ribbons of paint that are kind of laid down, almost like little squiggling worms. They seem to surround his face with a certain energy. Look at the one on the right. This is his self-portrait with a bandaged ear. We'll talk about this in a second, but even after he has injured himself and put a bandage on his head, he paints himself very honestly. He doesn't make himself look better or seem more sane than he actually is. A couple of more self-portraits exploring this interesting brush mark. Sometimes Van Gogh, to put down these ribbon of paints, would actually take tubes of paint and squeeze paint directly from the tubes. So that's really interesting. One of the reasons that Van Gogh is so endearing is not only because of his tragic life and not only because of all the letters he wrote, it's also because we feel like we know him through his self-portraits. We understand his despair and his frustration and his insanity. And if you look at the portrait on the left, uh, notice one eye is higher than the other. I mean, he looks a little more insane in this portrait compared to the one on the right, in which he seems a little more calm, although a little bit weary at the same time. This next work, Van Gogh's Chair, I really love because it is another kind of portrait. It's a self-portrait, and here, instead of painting himself, he has these little substitute objects that represent him. He has the chair that he sits in, and he has the pipe that he smokes, along with a piece of paper with the tobacco that he uses in the chair. The chair and the pipe are substitute sort of sitters for Van Gogh. I don't know. I just kind of like that. Notice in the background there is a box that has the word Vincent on it. One of the things that's endearing about Van Gogh is that he signs many of his paintings with his first name, not his last name. So there's this intimacy. It's almost like he wants to be known on a first name basis through his artwork. Another example of that is this painting, Vase with 12 Sunflowers. Van Gogh loves sunflowers and he paints them again and again. And you can see on this vase, there is his signature actually on the pot itself. Another sunflower painting, 15 sunflowers in a vase. To me, both of these flower paintings are luscious and full of life. I just really like that. Let's take a moment to give you a little bit of biographical information. Van Gogh is painting in Paris. He's absorbing all the lessons of the Impressionists, going beyond them, running in circles of post-Impressionists, and he gets to know Paul Gauguin, the artist that we just looked at, who was interested in primitive cultures. And he's really inspired by Gauguin, and Van Gogh decides to move to southern France to a place called Arles and set up an artist colony. He has this vision of starting an artistic community kind of far away from Paris, surrounded by the bright, joyful colors of southern France. And so he does this. He moves down there and he invites Gauguin, his friend, to come stay with him. And Van Gogh has visions of them going out and painting together and living in this awesome artistic community. And Gauguin actually takes him up on this. Van Gogh has rented a few rooms, and he has a room rented for Gauguin, and he prepares it for him by decorating it with some of his sunflower pictures. So when I look at these sunflower pictures, I think of the room that Van Gogh prepared for Gauguin. So Gauguin does come down. In fact, here is a painting by Gauguin. It is a picture he did of Van Gogh painting sunflowers, perhaps some of the sunflowers we saw in the earlier pictures. And it has Gauguin's typical brightly colored uh, areas and patches. And Van Gogh looks a little bit distorted here. Perhaps that's expressing some of Gauguin's feelings about his mental state. Who knows? But at any rate, Gauguin comes down to Arles, and for a while, everything's good. They go out and paint together, they go drinking together. But all is not well in the paradise of southern France. They also argue quite a bit. They argue about art and about life. And it's not helped that their arguments are fueled by alcohol. And there's one time where they've both been drinking and they get into an argument, and Van Gogh threatens Gauguin with a straight razor. And Gauguin just stares him down. And Van Gogh, feeling ashamed of himself, slinks away and in probably a drunken state, goes back to his apartment and cuts off the lower part of one of his ears, wraps it in paper, and takes it to a prostitute. And and then he collapses back in his room, and doctors find him and kind of nurse him back to health. But after that argument, things are kind of severed between Gauguin, and Gauguin leaves, and there's a rift in their friendship. Although later in life, they both expressed mutual admiration for each other and did correspond some. So I think there was some mending of their friendship. Now, in the last few years of his life, especially the last 2 years of his life, Van Gogh is painting like a madman, which he is probably not entirely sane. So, in some ways, that phrase is appropriate on multiple levels. He's painting just sometimes night and day. There's stories of Van Gogh wearing a straw hat with candles stuck in the brim, so that he can paint at night by candlelight. So he's a really hardcore painter and cranking out the work. Unfortunately, his mental state is deteriorating. For a while, he's committed to an asylum where he paints pictures outside the window of his asylum. In fact, the Starry Night was probably painted at an asylum in Saint-Remy, which is near Arles. During this time, he also paints portraits of some of his friends in southern France. This is his portrait of Dr. Gachet, who was a doctor who tried to help Van Gogh. He was also someone who was loved art, and so they had kind of an art connection. And Van Gogh sympathetically portrays the rather melancholy looking Dr. Gachet, who looks kind of sad himself. He leans on a table with some books and some flowers, and look at all the little ribbons of paint that kind of make up his clothing, his face, and the background. So we have a sense that Van Gogh is capturing some of the inner life of this rather sad looking doctor. Here's another portrait of one of his friends, who was the local postman, a guy named Joseph Roulin. And you can see here is the postman with his awesome facial hair, this massive beard, wearing his postal uniform. And he is in front of some bright yellow wallpaper, which is signed with Van Gogh's name at the very top. You can see Vincent there. And he painted lots and lots of pictures of this postman who helped him get settled in this town, and they were apparently very good friends. So uh, Van Gogh was not entirely friendless. Unfortunately, however, Van Gogh's mental problems and depression kind of caught up with him. Look at this next painting. It's one of the last paintings that he did. It's called Wheatfield with Crows, and there's something kind of ominous about this work. We have a flock of birds arising up from golden wheat that seems to be bent over by a wind, or at least leaning in the same direction, and these crows are flying into a darkened, stormy sky. Perhaps this painting suggests something about Van Gogh's mental state at this time, which was getting worse and worse. And he eventually got so depressed and despondent that one day he walked out into a field and shot himself in the stomach with a pistol. He made it back into town where he lay in bed, hovering between life and death for a while. His brother Theo, the art dealer, who was really Vincent's best friend throughout life, came down from Paris and was at his brother's side when Van Gogh died. And supposedly, Van Gogh's last words were something really depressing, depending on the account that you read. According to some accounts, his last words were, "The sadness will last forever." Others say he said, "Who would have dreamed that life could be so sad?" So, just a really heartbreaking character, and a wonderful, wonderful artist. And in many ways, his biography is one of the reasons his paintings are so popular. Soon after he died, his paintings began to sell. And today, paintings by Vincent van Gogh fetch in the millions of dollars. They're extremely popular. Here is an image of the grave of Vincent van Gogh. His brother Theo died just a few months after him, perhaps of a broken heart. They were just very close and really good friends. And Theo was buried beside Van Gogh. So you can go today and see their graves. This wraps up our look at the post-impressionists. Just keep in mind that this is a group of artists who did amazing new things with color that had never been done before. And that is a trend that is going to continue into the 20th century. In fact, in the next module, we're going to start off looking at a group of artists who do even more stuff with color. So stick around. I will see you in the next module.